my little dashboard on the computer. It's quite cool, eh? But I'm not saying that you have to get rid of all your conditioning. I certainly haven't. I still have my old characteristics coming up. It's the de-attachment to them. It's this movement back from them. And sometimes mine act out, and they act out for a bit, and then there's a realization that they're acting out. But it's this movement from them that you aren't that you're this free presence. That's the freedom. It's not in being a perfect person. Like, we live in this society, and we've been bred into society with all these ideas and energies and ways of being. I don't think there will ever be or can ever be an enlightened human. Like, firstly, the human doesn't exist as an independent entity. There is consciousness as a live presence experiencing itself. And then how can you enlighten billions of conditions? So my body is made up of all these billion things. I don't know if it's billion things, but let's just say it's a billion things. Like all these cells, this blood, organs, muscles, chemicals, lots of water. So it's lined up with all these things. Sorry, did I say lined up? It's made of all these things, and it's always going to have conditions to it, no matter what. You can't uncondition something, just like the water is going to have condition to it, and the tree is going to have a condition to it. And there isn't like a singular entity there. There's lots of forces that come together. Even interacting with somebody makes you a different person, or makes your conditions react differently, so it makes a different person. Going into a group makes a different person. It's just that our mind is constantly fixated on this idea of one singular person where there isn't. So you go into a room full of people, and then this personality structure, these conditions change. When you're by yourself, they change. When you're with your animals, they change. When you're in nature, they change. But we get into this idea of wanting this perfect enlightened being, or to become a perfect enlightened being. And this is just going to create loads of seeking in you, because this isn't possible. This is impossible. Like, the human has its condition, just like the dog has its condition. And the bird has its condition. But what can happen is a detachment from the person, and a seeing and a waking up to you being present. And that changes things. But the human's never going to be enlightened. If you believe, the human, that you're going to one day be perfect, you're always going to be in the wheel of suffering. Because you're always going to have this idea in your head, an idea of what perfection is. So perfection is no negative emotions, no anger, no jealousy, no rage, no negativity. And then if you go even further, you can say positive things only come to me, because the external is a reflection of the internal, so there's no conflict. And this imagine meeting this person that had no conditions. What would they look like? When I was younger, I tried to write a theatre piece on an enlightened person, like what an enlightened person would be like. And I couldn't get the character to do anything, because they have to have conditions to move. They have to have wants to move. And as soon as you have wants, you have conditions. So even if it's to express reality, there's still a want to express reality, which requires particular conditions. So say if you're living with this enlightened perfect person, so let's imagine this. So you've got this idea of this enlightened person that's perfect. So imagine if you're living with that enlightened person, and that person repetitively walks mud onto the doormat. So they come in and they put mud on the doormat and they never clean it up. And when you get into a discussion with them and ask them, you know, could you clean it up? They say, sure. And then the next day they don't, and they don't. You see, you don't imagine these details when you're imagining a enlightened person, but I've been around so many people that had these awakening experiences or awakened, and you just miss the details. So say they repetitively, and then they say, okay, yeah, sure, tomorrow I'll clear it up. But then they come in and they don't clear it up again. It keeps going on like this. That you ask them to clean it up and they don't, or they clean it up, but it's still not very good. And then eventually you say to them, maybe eventually you get angry with them. Or eventually you say to them, why do you keep doing that? What do you imagine their response is going to be? You imagine their response is going to be, there's nobody here doing anything. I think that you like that idea, because then that gets you, if you're enlightened, that gets you out of ever doing anything wrong again. You can always be right. But imagine if you did live with someone and their response was, there is nobody doing it, it's just happening. So imagine their actions get more extreme. They never clean up their plates in the kitchen. They always leave it for you. And then they keep saying to you, there's nobody doing it, it's just happening. So you clean up all their plates, you clean up their mud, you clean up their plate, you clean all their clothes, and it gets more and more extreme. Whereas I would just see that them not doing those things is their conditioning. It might be for lots of different reasons. It might be that their mum nagged them lots as a child, or they were never expected to do anything around the house. Now to me, a balanced person, so somebody that's had an awakening and has become a more balanced person, after they repetitively keep leaving the mud on the carpet, and they understand, like, it's not, I mean, walking mud into the house, someone's got to clean it up, otherwise eventually you're just going to live in mud. So they're a rational human being, they can see that, they can understand that with their brain. So a more balanced human being is, you would say to them, how come you keep leaving mud on the carpet and expecting me to clean it up? A more balanced person would say, oh yeah, sorry, when I was a child I was never expected to do anything, so I just forget. I never remember to do it. Maybe you could help remind me to do it. Or maybe we could come to a compromise, like you clean up this mud and then I'll clean up something else. Somebody that says to you, there is nobody that does it, mud is just happening. This could, on your side, be really amazing for you if you took it in the right way and saw it as something to awaken you, like that annoyance at them. So you saw something as awakening. But maybe they think they're your teacher, or they're trying to teach you something or show you something, which could be really beautiful. But then the third thing, so I've given you two other explanations, but the third thing is, that seems like spiritual bypassing. That doesn't seem this seems like an idea of what they've got about spirituality, and basically they don't want to clean up the mud, and then they're just saying that to get out of it and be right. So you imagine like this idea of a perfect person with this perfect life that never has conflict and never has arguments and doesn't have any conditions, but think about it logically. Think about what that means logically. The best you can do on the human level is be as vulnerable and open to your conditionings and as aware of them as you can be, without just be as open as you can. The problem is, if the people around you aren't so open, that can be a lot more complicated, because if they're living in lots of lies about themselves, then communication could be really difficult. And if you were that vulnerable and open with someone that's living in lots of lies, then they'll just use it to manipulate you. That's but internally you could do that. The reason that we obsess about this idea of a perfect guru, this perfect figure, it's like what we do with everything. So it's like exactly what we do with, say, the celebrity or the model that's airbrushed. You know, that the photos are taken and they airbrush them to make them look more perfect. And it's also like these celebrity magazines like Hello, where it's always presenting like this perfect life with these really smart sofa and really beautiful houses. It's like this dream that we want to dream of perfection. And that dream is a thought and an image coming up into your head. And it's got nothing to do with the reality of what's happening. And the reality of what's happening is being totally vulnerable to who you are on the human, and in that vulnerability, you disappear. In this vulnerability of being yourself on the human level, which is whatever arises in the moment, it's not living through this idea of yourself, that is where you disappear. That's where the seeking ends. Love is the acceptance of this as it is. Like, that's the game of this. It's to love duality. It's to love the opposites of the good and the bad, and to be this animal, this human animal, that at the end of the day would do anything to survive, manipulates and destroys its environment to survive, but to see the love in it. And then on the human level, it's to expand more and more to that love. And the way that you expand more to that love is being so vulnerable and totally accepting. This is so beautiful. Totally accepting the good and the bad which lies in all of us. I've never claimed to be an enlightened human, and I don't want to be an enlightened human. My nature beyond the human is enlightened, but in the human world, it's the world of duality, of positives and negatives. And on the human level, my aspiration is to grow more and more towards that love, and to totally accept the nature of it all and embrace the nature of it all. Makes me want to cry. I don't know if you can hear that. The other reason that it might be that we have to have this idea of enlightenment is because how it has to be sold. Because it's having a little dream. Because we're fickle creatures in a way, and we're used to this sales system of painting something as shiny and perfect. And when we get into this subject, it's like we have to have this perfection that we move towards, because we don't know how to move something that's containing all of duality. contains it all. And that's what waking up is holding all of this life. Every bit of it. And being totally humble to it. And does that benefit you on the level of the human that is moving towards survival? Sure. Yeah. It makes you incredibly powerful to embrace yourself. Not powerful like a dictator. Powerful as in you don't get bogged down by experiences. And your action is out of love rather than hate. Even if you slip into anger for moments or negativity for a moment, underneath that is such a connection to that love. The human is aspiring to it. It can't help but aspire to that love because that's its source. So it doesn't waste energy in revenge or hatred. Or needless mental activity.